You ever get that moment in marriage where your wife gives you one simple task and you just know you're about to fail? She walks in calm and confident and says, "Nate, I'm giving you one job, just one." And somehow, the smaller the job, the more terrifying it becomes. It's like a trap disguised as a favor. I stand there nodding, pretending I totally understand, but inside my brain is already running through every possible way this could go wrong. The way she explains it, slow and deliberate, makes it sound easy, but the moment she stops talking, I realize I've already forgotten half of what she said. That's marriage. That's the hook. Everyone listening immediately knows where this is going because they've been there. You're about to mess up the simplest thing, and your wife already knows it. So I repeat the instructions back to her, trying to look confident, but she gives me that look, a quiet, steady look that says, "I hope you survive this, but I know you won't." I try to reassure her with a little nod, a small smile, the classic husband move that says, "I totally got this," even though my entire soul is screaming, "Nope, not a chance." And somehow, repeating the instructions only makes it worse because it makes me overthink. I start imagining all the ways this simple task could turn into chaos. The audience is hooked here because everyone recognizes the panic creeping, and slowly, that spiral of overthinking, the inevitable disaster looming just ahead. I leave the house with this fragile confidence, striding out like I'm on a heroic mission. I even hum a little tune to calm my nerves. But the second I reach the store, everything collapses. I forget the brand, the size, even the color of what I'm supposed to get. I wander the aisles like a man lost in a maze, picking up random things, questioning every decision. Even ask a store employee for help, and of course, my explanation makes zero sense. "Do you have the blue thing with the thing on top?" And the poor guy just stares at me like I've lost my mind. That's the slow burn comedy. Ordinary life turns into chaos, and the audience can't help but laugh because they've been there. They know it's going to get worse. Finally, I head home with what I think is the correct item, feeling proud, imagining my wife's smile of approval. I walk through the door, chest puffed, and hand her the bag like a trophy. She picks it up slowly, inspects it, and the look she gives me is pure, unspoken judgment. She doesn't yell, she doesn't scream, she just stares, and that stare says everything. "You had one job. One, and you blew it." I start explaining, fumbling over words, trying to rationalize the choices I made, but the more I talk, the worse it sounds. The audience laughs because they can feel the tension, the inevitability of disaster, and Nate's calm, understated delivery makes it even funnier. And that's when I realized something about marriage. It's a lifelong group project where I am always the weakest link, the guy who tries and fails spectacularly, but somehow my wife keeps trusting me anyway. She fixes the mistakes quietly, patiently, and I stand there thinking, "Yep, completely blew it again." But somehow that's what makes life funny. That's what makes love real. And that's the punchline. You mess up, you get corrected, and you keep trying. That's marriage. That's comedy. And somehow it's worth every disastrous, hilarious moment. Nate always says the funniest part about marriage is how the smallest, simplest task can feel like the most dangerous thing you've ever been asked to do. His wife walks in calm, confident, and says, I'm giving you one job, just one. And somehow, the smaller the task, the more terrifying it becomes. It's like someone handed him a live grenade disguised as a favor. He stands there nodding and smiling, trying to appear calm, competent, and completely in control, but inside his head, panic is setting in. He knows the moment she finishes speaking, he's already halfway to screwing it up. That tension, the quiet dread mixed with feigned confidence, is the perfect hook. The audience immediately knows the disaster is coming, but they can't look away. He tries to focus, mentally reviewing the instructions, but the way she explains it, slowly, clearly, almost too calmly, only makes it seem more ominous. There's something about slow instruction in marriage that signals this is simple enough that anyone should do it. And yet somehow you won't. Nate's internal dialogue races through every way he could possibly fail. He imagines forgetting a step, choosing the wrong item, misreading the instructions, even doing something right, but still somehow being wrong. The more he thinks about it, the worse it gets, because overthinking in marriage is like pouring gasoline on a small fire. The audience can relate instantly. The fear of failure, mixed with wanting to appear competent, is universally hilarious. He nods again, the classic husband maneuver that says, "I got this," while internally screaming, "Nope, I have no idea what I'm doing." This juxtaposition, outward calm versus inward chaos, is where Nate's comedic genius lives. He knows everyone watching has been in that position, pretending to understand something while your brain is spiraling through the most absurd possible scenarios. The audience is hooked because they can feel the panic creeping in, that slow, inevitable unraveling that makes every mundane task suddenly suspenseful. Then comes the subtle but deadly judgment. He notices her eyes, calm but assessing, as if she's already predicting the exact moment this Owen job will turn into chaos. And they're smart. That's the hook, the moment that says everything without a word. He tries to reassure her with another smile, another confident nod, but he knows it's pointless. She's seen it all before: the confident beginning, the gradual panic, inevitable disaster. Draws the humor out of this by letting the audience see both sides: the quiet expectation of failure from the wife, the nervous optimism from the husband who knows he's doomed. Even the environment contributes to the tension: the warm, familiar kitchen, the cozy but slightly messy living room, the little details that suggest normalcy and domestic life, all contrast perfectly with the mental chaos Nate is experiencing. Every small movement he makes, shifting weight from one foot to the other, adjusting the list in his hand, glancing nervously at her, is loaded with anticipation. And the audience, hooked by these subtle cues, can already hear the slow burn comedy building. This one simple moment, standing there receiving instructions, is already a full story of anxiety, anticipation, and relatable humor, perfectly set up for the chaos that's about to unfold. Knows that once the instructions are given, the real comedy begins. He repeats them back to his wife, trying to sound confident, but every word feels heavier than the last. Her calm, measured expression doesn't help. If anything, it makes him more anxious. That quiet, knowing look she gives him is like a subtle warning, the kind of warning you can't ignore because it's both gentle and lethal. Nate's mind starts racing, questioning every tiny detail she just said. Did she mean the blue one or the slightly lighter blue one? Is size important? Should he ask for clarification or just trust his instincts? The internal panic builds because in Nate's world, overthinking is both a shield and a trap. He wants to appear competent, but the more he thinks, the more he realizes how much he doesn't know. And the audience feels that tension instantly, laughing because they've all been there. As he tries to process, Nate starts running through a mental checklist, imagining all the potential disasters that could result from a single wrong choice. Every step becomes a minefield. Should he double? Check the list. Should he remember it from memory? What if he remembers it wrong? The humor lies in the absolute absurdity of treating a simple household task like it's a life or death mission. The audience is hooked because they can feel the spiral happening in real time, the slow burn of panic mixed with determination, which is classic Nate style. He tries to mask the panic with the usual husband gestures, nodding, pretending to write things down, making small verbal confirmations that sound intelligent but are essentially meaningless. He repeats the instructions again, more slowly this time, thinking that maybe, just maybe, repetition will make him appear confident. But this only exposes the flaw in his plan. The more he repeats, the more he notices the details he initially ignored, the more he realizes how easily he could make a mistake. The audience laughs because the comedy comes not just from the mistakes themselves, but from the careful, deliberate build-up of tension, the anticipation of disaster in even the calmest situations. The quiet judgment from his wife is the final layer of this scene. Her silence, her steady gaze, communicates volumes. She doesn't need to say a word. Nate knows that she expects him to fail. That expectation, combined with his overthinking, creates the perfect storm for humor. He starts talking to himself under his breath, rehearsing possible outcomes, mental notes for strategies that may or may not exist. The audience is drawn in because they understand the relatability of trying to overcompensate for a minor task while feeling the crushing pressure of expectation. Even small environmental details add to the comedy. The list in his hand, the slightly cluttered kitchen counter, the way the sunlight hits the room, all create a sense of normalcy contrasted with his internal chaos. Every subtle movement, from shifting his weight to clearing his throat, adds to the tension. The hook here is that ordinary life becomes extraordinary simply because Nate views it through the lens of overthinking, self-doubt, humorous exaggeration. The audience feels his panic, anticipates the mistakes, and laughs along with him, completely engaged in the unfolding disaster before it even begins. Nate steps out of the house with the kind of confidence that only exists in the moments right before disaster strikes. He struts down the driveway, a little too proud, carrying the shopping list like it's a sacred scroll that holds the key to his domestic success. For 30 seconds, he convinces himself he's capable, that he can handle this simple task without incident. But that confidence is fragile by a thread, and every step he takes toward the car is punctuated by a creeping awareness that he might already be failing. The audience is immediately hooked because they recognize this delicate balance. The calm exterior masking complete internal panic, and they know the inevitable chaos is just around the corner. Once he reaches the store, reality begins to crumble. The fluorescent lights, the endless rows of products, and the bright, distracting signs all conspire against him. He stands in the aisle, staring at the shelves like a man lost in a labyrinth, trying to recall the instructions his wife gave him. It was simple at home, but here, under harsh lighting and surrounded by too many choices, it has become an impossible riddle. The humor comes from his serious, deliberate attempts to navigate what should be a trivial errand, and the audience is drawn in by the growing tension. Almost hear his internal monologue unraveling with every passing second. He grabs one item, inspects it, hesitates, puts it back, thinking maybe it's not the right one. Then he picks up another, comparing it mentally to the first, second guessing every color, size, and shape. He mutters under his breath, was it this shade of blue? Or that one? Maybe the other one. The absurdity of his overthinking is amplified by the quiet chaos of the store, the bustling shoppers who seem to know exactly what they're doing, and the employees who stare blankly when he asks for help. "Excuse me, do you have the blue thing with the thing on top?" he asks, and the employee's expression says it all. This man has completely lost it. The audience laughs because they understand both his desperation and his oblivious confidence. As he wanders, his mind races through worst-case scenarios, imagining the disappointment he'll face at home if he chooses the wrong item. Each step he takes is heavy with the weight of impending failure, and every glance at the shopping list only intensifies his panic. Nate's humor here is subtle but effective. He lets the audience feel the anxiety, the hesitation, the mounting absurdity of the situation. Even small movements, like pacing slightly or adjusting the bag in his hand, add to the tension and comedic timing. The store becomes a battlefield of indecision. Every option he considers seems wrong, every choice a potential disaster. He tries to apply logic, methodically eliminating possibilities. Overthinking turns the logical approach into chaos. The hooks here are the relatability and anticipation. The audience knows he's doomed, yet they remain captivated, laughing at the slow motion unraveling of what should have been a simple errand. By the time he finally reaches the checkout counter, exhausted and juggling items he hopes are correct, the audience is fully invested in the absurdity of his heroic but doomed effort. Once Nate is deep in the store, the task that seemed so simple at home becomes a full-blown expedition. Every shelf, every aisle, every little decision stretches out into a labyrinth of indecision and panic. He stands there holding two products in his hands, squinting at labels as if they contain secret codes he's supposed to decipher. One is slightly bigger, the other slightly smaller. One is labeled slightly differently, and somehow in his mind, this translates into a life or death scenario. The audience is immediately hooked because they can see the absurdity, the deliberate slow burn of panic that transforms a mundane errand into something epic. Nate's humor thrives on these ordinary moments made extraordinary. He tries to rationalize, thinking maybe the size doesn't matter, maybe color isn't the key. I should just pick one and go. But every instinct in his body tells him that if he chooses wrong, the consequences at home will be catastrophic. He mutters under his breath, whispers tiny debates with himself, even debates with imaginary versions of his wife offering corrections and critiques. This internal dialogue, presented in Nate's calm, understated way, and they're smart, is where the comedy lands. Audiences recognize their own overthinking in a perfectly relatable, painfully funny way. Then there's the store employees. Nate tries to ask them for help, but his explanations make no sense. "Excuse me, do you have the blue thing with the thing on top?" The employee tilts their head, blank stare, as if saying, "You've completely lost it, sir." The audience laughs because the situation is absurd, yet believable. The combination of Nate's polite desperation and the silent judgment of strangers makes the tension both relatable and hilarious. Every awkward interaction is a hook that keeps viewers leaning in, anticipating the inevitable disaster, yet enjoying every second of the suspense. Nate examines the items again, switching them in his hands, weighing the pros and cons like a stockbroker analyzing a billion-dollar deal. In his head, the stakes are monumental, even though the real-world consequences are minor. He imagines what his wife's reaction will be: disappointed sigh, the slow shake of the head that will follow him into eternity. Each pause, each careful comparison heightens the comedy. The audience feels his anxiety, the anticipation of failure, and the absurdity of a man taking a small, simple task as seriously as if the fate of the universe depended on it. Even his body language adds to the humor. He paces slightly, adjusts the items in his hands, scratches his head, and mutters little reassurances to himself. Each movement is loaded with comedic tension, the quiet panic of a man who knows he's overthinking everything, but cannot stop. Every small decision becomes a mini climax, every hesitation a punchline building slowly toward the inevitable meltdown. The audience laughs because they can see the trajectory, the domino effect of mistakes that Nate navigates with charm, obliviousness, perfectly timed pauses. By the time he makes it to the checkout counter, the suspense has reached a peak. He balances the items, the list, and his fragile confidence, hoping beyond hope that he has chosen correctly. Every micro expression, every nervous glance, every slight misstep is a hook that pulls the audience further into the story. They are laughing, anticipating, completely immersed in the comedic tension of a man who transformed a simple errand into a carefully orchestrated disaster. Nate's understated delivery, calm tone, and attention to the slow, absurd unraveling of events make even the smallest decisions a masterclass in storytelling and comedy. Nate walks through the door with a fragile sense of victory, holding the items he's painstakingly chosen like a hero returning from battle. In his mind, smart, he's already imagining the smile of approval, the nod of satisfaction, maybe even a little applause for a job well done. He sets the bag down on the counter, chest puffed just slightly, trying to radiate calm confidence. But as soon as his wife picks up the item, the entire illusion crumbles. Her eyes widen just a fraction, a subtle shift in expression that tells Nate everything he needs to know. She doesn't yell, she doesn't scream, she just silently examines what he's brought home. Quiet judgment is a hook that immediately engages the audience. They feel the tension, the dread, the inevitability of the punchline building. Nate tries to explain, fumbling for words, attempting to justify his choices. Well, I thought maybe his sentences trail off, losing any semblance of logic, and that's where the humor peaks. The audience laughs because they understand the absurdity. A man who believes he has succeeded is met with silent, patient, unspoken criticism that is far more devastating than any words could be. The slow burn of Nate's calm, understated delivery makes the situation hilarious. He doesn't overreact, doesn't shout, he simply allows the tension and awkwardness to speak for itself, which makes the humor both subtle and explosive at the same time. As he stammers through explanations, his wife's expression remains unchanged, calm but entirely aware of his mistakes. Contrast his nervous energy versus her quiet composure is classic Nate Bargatze. The audience immediately identifies with this dynamic because everyone has experienced moments of failing in front of someone who expects competence in the simplest tasks. Nate's brilliance lies in how he stretches these small, everyday disasters into full stories, drawing laughs from anticipation, timing, and the relatable human fear of letting someone down. The environment amplifies the tension. The kitchen is warm, familiar, cozy even, but to Nate, it now feels like a courtroom. Every small detail, the countertop, the items in the bag, even the way light hits the room, becomes part of the scene. Depth to his panic. The audience is hooked because they can picture the setting vividly, enhancing the relatability and humor. Each gesture he makes, every small movement, emphasizes his inner chaos, making the audience both anxious and amused on his behalf. Reflects briefly on the absurdity of the situation. He realizes that no matter how simple the task seemed, somehow managed to complicate it, and yet that failure is exactly what makes the story so funny. The audience is drawn in because the humor comes from the combination of his earnest efforts, his complete inability to execute them properly, and the silent, inevitable judgment that follows. Every micro expression, every hesitant explanation, every pause adds to the comedic tension. Finally, Nate watches as his wife calmly corrects the situation, fixing the problem without a word of frustration. That quiet resolution is another hook. The audience laughs not just at his mistakes, but at the stark contrast between his panic and her effortless competence. The story resonates because it reflects universal experiences, the overconfidence, the missteps, the internal panic, the gentle correction that follows. Nate's understated delivery, paired with the tension-filled setup and slow unraveling of events, turns a simple domestic error into a masterclass in storytelling and relatable comedy. Nate sits back on the kitchen stool, exhausted, holding the wrong item in his hand, and for a moment, he just stares at it, trying to process the disaster he has created. There's a quiet, almost philosophical humor in that pause, because it's the point where he truly understands that marriage is a lifelong group project, and he is very clearly the weakest, most overconfident member. The audience immediately connects because they recognize themselves in his reflection, the repeated failures, the overconfidence, the panic, and the inevitable correction by someone who is far more competent. It's a moment that blends humor with relatability, and the hook is in the shared experience. Everyone has been the Nate in a similar story. He looks around the kitchen at the chaos he has inadvertently caused, the items slightly misplaced, the subtle traces of his overthinking scattered like breadcrumbs. His wife moves quietly, efficiently, correcting everything he has done without a single complaint. Nate's humor comes from observing this with a mix of awe, exasperation, and admiration. The audience is drawn in because they can feel the contrast, the calm, competent partner versus the fumbling, anxious husband, and they laugh at the inevitable absurdity of the situation. It's not just about the failed task, it's about the human dynamic, the rhythm of domestic life that turns mundane chores into comedy gold. In that moment, Nate's internal monologue kicks in. He starts cataloging every mistake he made, every wrong choice, every overthought decision. He does it with the self-deprecating charm that makes him so relatable. He jokes about his own thought process, the way he rationalized, the way he convinced himself he was capable. The audience laughs because they recognize the familiar pattern of human overconfidence. That anticipation, the feeling that something is about to go wrong, combined with the humor of watching it unfold, is a hook that keeps viewers fully engaged. He reflects further on trust and patience, realizing that despite his repeated failures, his wife continues to give him responsibilities, trusting him to try even when the outcome is uncertain. The comedy here is subtle. The audience sees both the admiration and the impending doom wrapped in the same scene. Nate's understated delivery makes it hilarious because he presents the reflection calmly, almost philosophically, while the absurdity of his failures hangs in the air. It's the perfect balance of insight and humor, drawing the audience into the narrative while keeping them laughing at every misstep. Even small details, the way he fumbles the item in his hand, the slight shake of his head, the subtle sigh he releases as he watches her fix, everything add to the humor. The audience is hooked not just by the story, but by the physicality, the expressions, the timing. Nate's genius lies in turning simple domestic errors into epic storytelling moments where each pause, each glance, each minor panic becomes a punchline in itself. Finally, he acknowledges the pattern. He will continue to fail, overthink, mess up but tasks. That's what life and marriage is about. The humor comes from acceptance, from the knowing smile that even in failure, there's love, patience, and endless material for comedy. The audience laughs, not just at the mistakes, but at the humanity behind them, the relatable rhythm of trying, failing, being quietly corrected. Nate's reflective, self-aware humor transforms ordinary domestic chaos into a story that is simultaneously heartwarming, relatable, and side-splittingly funny, keeping the audience engaged until the very last moment. And that's the thing about life and marriage in particular. You keep trying, even when you know deep down that you're probably going to mess it up. You take the simplest tasks, the tiniest responsibilities, somehow manage to turn them into full-blown adventures of chaos. And yet, even after all the mistakes, the overthinking, the fumbling, and the little disasters, she's still there, quietly fixing what you couldn't, giving you another chance, somehow letting you feel like a hero, even if only for a few seconds. That's the beauty of it. That's the punchline. We all recognize life doesn't have to be perfect, and neither do we. But the laughter, the patience, the little shared moments of chaos are what make it worth it. You fail, you stumble, you overthink, you panic, and somehow it's hilarious and somehow it's love.